What's up, guys? This is TheKephas. In this video, I am going to showcase some new macros that I have created for World of Warcraft using a mod called Gnome Sequencer Enhanced. This mod allows you to create extremely powerful macros that can perform most, if not all, of your rotation with a single button. This can be extremely useful for individuals like myself who has a disability, or for people who just want to be lazy. So keep in mind that these macros are created primarily for those who are playing the game at a more casual level, but feel free to use them and alter them as you see fit. If you have further questions about the mod or my macros, I recommend checking out my FAQ video, and if you'd like to learn more about how to play the class in question, you might want to check out my crash course. It can help get you started, and I will provide links to all of these things in the description below. So today we're going to check out the macro that I've created for Enhancement Shamans, and I have to say, having literally just finished doing the mall portion of Shadowlands content and getting my character over there to start Threads of Fate and all that kind of stuff, I've been trying to mess around with every class a little bit. I have to say that I'm very impressed with Enhancement Shamans. They're definitely one of the more fun, I feel, classes that I was playing, and of course that goes into the spell effects, how fun it is to watch, but also just I like the way the rotation feels now, and I like how really easy to macro this class is. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to type /GS to open up Gnome Sequencer, and then we're going to scroll down. The macro will be called Kef Enhancement, and it is an all-in-one macro with the help of modifiers, of course. So let's go ahead and take a look at it now. We'll go over a couple of things in the talents in a little bit, but yeah, so let's get right into this. Now, first things first, with modifiers, Shift is Lightning Bolt, and then Control is Chain Lightning, with Alt being Wind Fury Totem. So the idea here is that when you have the Maelstrom weapon stacks, you're going to hold down the appropriate modifier for the situation to use Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning to get the instant cast. And then, of course, Wind Fury Totem is there for you to refresh it, making sure you keep that up at all times. Simply hold down the modifier, Alt, and then there you go. But I've also added Wind Fury Totem into pre-macro. So the idea here is that when you start an encounter, the first thing that your character should do is drop your Wind Fury Totem. Very convenient because you are a melee ranged fighter, which means that it should drop it right in the middle of the fight, right where you're standing. So it's very straightforward, easy. It will only do this once per encounter, so that way it's not just constantly trying to refresh or place down your Wind Fury Totem. Your Wind Fury Totem will last for 2 minutes, and then you'll need to replace it with a modifier with Alt, but the first one you should never have to do it. So the idea here is that when you're leveling, right, and you're out in the world doing whatever, the macro will plop down your Wind Fury Totem wherever you're at. So once the combat, once the battle ends, this cast sequence will reset, and you'll start all over again. So that's kind of the idea there. So that way it makes sure that you're constantly putting it down, but you're not overdoing it, and it makes it a little bit easier for leveling. I did do this a lot. Now, there were times where, Wind Fury Totem wasn't put down right away for whatever reason, or, just different weird things like that. But eventually, it would go down. Usually, most of the time, it would go down early on in the fight. But, also just know if it's not being put down, you have the option to just hold down Alt and do it. And you can also, if you don't like this contraption that I've created in pre-macro at all, you can just use Alt to place it down manually yourself. So the idea here is just to make things easier. That's what these macros are always designed for, so just keep that in mind. Now let's get into the main macro. Obviously, Feral Spirit, first thing. Longer cooldown, but that's the first thing you want to do. And then after that, the macro is going to do it's a cast sequence, Flame Shock and Frost Shock, okay? So the cool thing about Flame Shock now, this is not something that was really the case before, is that Flame Shock now shares a cooldown with Frost Shock. So putting them in a cast sequence means that I'll do Flame Shock and then Frost Shock, and then after the cooldown's done, then it'll do Flame Shock again. Now the trick that I was trying to figure out is how many Frost Shocks can you get in before you do a Flame Shock? Well, the thing is, you can do one first, right? So you do Flame Shock, and then the cooldown 6 seconds. And then you do Frost Shock, and then you got another 6 seconds. Well, the ability is 18 seconds long, and then you're at 12 seconds, and then you got to wait another 6 seconds again. It's really confusing, but usually I could get 1 Frost Shock in comfortably with it using all the other abilities, and what would happen sometimes is that it would fall off. So I'd try to do like 2 Frost Shocks, and then I would see Flame Shock fall off, and then that was questionable, like, is that what you want? Is that bad? So I don't know what's better, 1 Frost Shock or 2. 1 Frost Shock guarantees that Flame Shock will never fall off. 2 Frost Shocks would sometimes mean that Flame Shock would fall off. So you can decide for yourself which is better, or you could just, you know, not do this at all. You could totally use these abilities on separate buttons. You could put Flame Shock on here or Frost Shock and then manage Flame Shock separately, but that's going to lead to other problems because they share a cooldown. So you can't put them in lines by themselves, just normal cast lines, because they share a cooldown and it won't ensure the right one's getting used. So you want to make sure that Flame Shock goes off, and that way you keep that up, but then you don't want to overcast it and not get the benefit of using as much Frost Shock as you can. So that's the most complicated part of doing this, so just keep that in mind. But the way I've got it here, it guarantees that you'll get a Frost Shock in between, and you'll make sure that you keep Flame Shock up. So you can test it out, you can kind of experiment for yourself. I'm going to continue to experiment myself as well, but for what testing I've done, this seemed to be the most effective. And obviously the cast sequence will reset when you switch to a different target, allowing you to reapply your Flame Shock on a new target. So that's something else to keep in mind as well. Next up is pretty straightforward. You've got a bunch of cooldowns. A lot of them are talents. Storm Strike first, obviously that's going to be used, and then Elemental Blast, Ice Strike, Fire Nova, Sundering, and Earthen Spike will all be used on cooldown if you choose any of them as a talent. The only one we're going to go over is Elemental Blast, and we'll go over that when we get into the talent portion, but there is a little bit of a caveat there that I didn't really think about until later, but we'll explain that there. So then, of course, we finish things off with Lava Lash and then Crash Lightning. The macro is going to use all of these abilities on cooldown. So it's a very straightforward rotation because it's just a bunch of cooldowns. So even when Storm Strike's cooldown resets, you know, the macro is obviously going to use it as soon as it can. So it does a pretty good job at keeping all of these abilities on cooldown, managing your Flame Shock and Frost Shock. Hope I explained that whole situation as best I can. It's a little bit confusing, but yeah, there you go. And then, of course, we've got Stormkeeper and Ascendance. If you choose either one of those as talents, then the macro will use them on cooldown. Again, similar caveat to Stormkeeper we're going to go over as well as Elemental Blast. So anyways, that's the macro. Pretty straightforward. With the use of modifiers, everything can be done with one button. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the talents. Now the cool thing is a lot of these are simply passive abilities, and a lot of them are just straightforward instant casts with cooldowns. Okay, so that makes them very easy to macro. The thing we need to go over is Elemental Blast. Now the thing that I was racking my brain around this because I was using this one and I have it in the macro, and it didn't occur to me right away that the way Maelstrom Weapon works is that it reduces the cast time of all your cast time abilities. That would include healing spells, anything that has a cast time. So obviously, as you can see, Elemental Blast has a cast time, and for some reason that just it wasn't registering in my brain. So I was seeing myself really never generating Maelstrom charges, so I didn't know what the deal was. So the thing is I don't know, because Maelstrom Weapon, Elemental Blast is a pretty strong ability, and it has a 12-second cooldown. So I don't know if it's if you would include that in. You only want to use it whenever you have 5 stacks, right? Because it does have a cast time, and that would significantly, you know, that would halt your auto attacks and all that kind of stuff. So that's something that you really don't want to do. You really don't want to be casting a spell, so you don't want to have any cast time. So I don't know what's best here with this one. So I would assume that you would want to wait until you have 5 stacks of Maelstrom Weapon to use Elemental Blast, and you would use that instead of Lightning Bolt, and then when that's on cooldown, you go back to using Lightning Bolt. I don't know. So the thing is I've got it in the macro. Obviously, it's not going to use it only when you have 5 stacks. It's going to use it as soon as it's off cooldown. If you have some stacks, it's going to be a faster cast time. If you have 5 stacks, it's going to be instant. But that's something that you need to keep in mind. And if that's the case, then you might want to remove it from the macro and use it on a separate button if you want to use Elemental Blast. So I'm going to let you decide. I put it in the macro because it does have a cooldown. It's easy. You can just throw it in the macro and it will use it on cooldown. But it doesn't guarantee you that you only use it when you get an instant cast with with 5 Maelstrom weapons. So that's something that you really should keep in mind when it comes to Elemental Blast. And that would also apply to Stormkeeper as well. This is a 1-minute cooldown temporary buff ability, and it does also have a cast time, meaning that when you have 5 stacks, it's going to be instant cast. So it's another one of those abilities that you might only want to use whenever you have 5 stacks of Maelstrom weapon. And with Elemental Blast and with Stormkeeper, that would mean, if that's the case, then you want to remove those from the macro. Of course, I'm going through every class, learning the basics and reteaching the basics to make it easy for everybody else. But all the advanced tricks and stuff like that, I'm still learning myself because it's all new. So I want to get these out as quickly as I can, but just something to keep in mind: if you want these to be instant cast and you only want to use them when you have 5 stacks of Maelstrom or more, then you definitely want to remove these from the macro and use them on separate buttons. Okay, the last thing that we should probably talk about is Hailstorm. Now, this is passive. It works just fine the way it is, but the thing is when you have a lot of enemies that you're fighting, a lot of people suggest that with Hailstorm, you don't even need to worry about Flame Shock. You would only just want to use Frost Shock, okay? Because as you consume Maelstrom weapon, your Frost Shock is enhanced significantly for AoE purposes. Now, the challenge there, of course, is that we've got Flame Shock in the macro and then Frost Shock as the other as the secondary and as the second in the cast line. And of course, when you switch to a different target, the macro resets, so you will be doing a lot of flame shocks. The macro is almost designed as if you're not using Hailstorm, so keep that in mind. The solution there is, I really don't know what the solution would be in that situation, except that maybe make a second macro. If you have Hailstorm, make a second macro for AoE and only put Frost Shock in it. That would be the only thing I could think of for AoE specifically, if you choose Hailstorm as an ability, right, or as a talent. Okay, so that's the only thing I can really think to do there, but it's really not worth me doing. Like, I don't want to make an entire macro just for one talent, but that's something that if you feel like you want to do, you can totally do that, and it would still work out pretty well. You would just use Frost Shock, you would never use Flame Shock, and you would get all the benefits of Hailstorm. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, these are all instant cast passives, really easy to use. They work fine in the macro, and that's pretty much everything you need to know. I hope I went over that pretty well. The macro works out really well. Obviously, with every class, there are some quid pro quos. Such a hard word to say, but it's my favorite. So I hope this helps out you guys. I'd like to know what you think about it in the comments below, and I will see you guys on the next one. And that's basically everything you need to know about these macros and how they work. Remember, these macros work best when they are spammed. So either press the button as fast as you can, or use a rapid fire button, which is fair game as long as you're the one pressing the button. As powerful as these macros are, they are far from perfect. So if you want to play the game at a high level and get the most out of your class, I highly recommend that you play the game without these macros. But if you'd like to get started with Gnome Sequencer Enhanced, you can do so by downloading and installing the mod. A link can be found in the description below. Along with it, you will find payspin links for any macros featured in this video. If you'd like to use them, simply click the link and you'll be taken to a raw payspin of the macro. Select the entire macro, copy, log into the appropriate class, type /GS to open the Gnome Sequencer screen, click on Import, paste the macro into the available space, make sure that Automatically Create Macro Icon is checked, and click Import. You can now drag the icon to your action bar and the macro is ready to be used. If you followed all the steps correctly, the macro should be working fine. If something isn't working, start over and make sure that you follow all the steps correctly. If you are having further issues, I recommend that you check out the mod page or contact the mod's author for more information. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is TheKephas. Until next time.